continuing our festivities here for the 40th anniversary celebration of their Lordship, Shri Radha Londonishvaras. Shri Radha Londonishvaras ki Jai! 40th anniversary Mahotsav ki Jai! So, feel exceptionally blessed, honored, and the opportunity to introduce our two esteemed guests. Earlier this afternoon, I was very fortunate to meet for the first time Yamuna Prabhu, and it was very overwhelming. I can honestly say I felt like I was coming back into the association of someone that I've known for a very long time, very, very loving and very warm. And she's here tonight to share with us many realizations of Krishna consciousness, association with Srila Prabhupada, and instrumental activities for the development and installation of their Lordship, Shri Radha Londonishvaras. So we're very honored to have her with us. And also returning back into our association after some separation is Malati Prabhu, who's also very, very wonderful and exceptional devotee. She was here with us a couple of years ago for the, I think it was the 38th? Me too.
More than 2 years ago.
38th anniversary of the installation of their Lordships. And they're both here with us this evening. And we'll, yeah. So please, ladies, you can come right up to the front. And Mother.
Way in.
And Bruce, you can move. Yeah, we're used to it here. Everyone can. We've been talking all week about family atmosphere.
Squeeze in.
Let's squeeze in. So please.
Someone can sit underneath here.
You can actually.
Under the lens, if you like. Someone small.
Someone small. If there are any very small people, you can sit underneath the tripod. One seat left in the room. So please, let us. Yeah. So let us welcome.
Small and move together.
Let us welcome these devotees by chanting very loudly 3 Haribol.
Haribol! Haribol! Haribol!
I'm just sitting here to listen to you, and I may say something. Oh dear. So let us all begin together. Everyone in the room will say our invocation. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Shtapitam Jena Mudakare Swayam Rupa Kalamayam Dadati Swapadam Divam Namo Vishnu Jaya Sri Sri Radha Londonishvaras ki
Jai.
Jai Jagannath Subhadra Balaram ki Jai. Jaya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. My sincerest and humble apologies, I suppose I could say first before obeisances, to all you. Feel so blessed to have been invited to come here for this historic event. And I'm kind of amazed that I actually got here. And I've been watching on the video, the streaming video, some really wonderful katha about the 40th event, honoring events that have happened in the last 40 years. And by Krishna's grace, I'm in the same space with Malati Prabhu, who is one of my, I suppose, dearest to my heart devotees, because not only have I known her for a very long time, but in Srila Prabhupada's service she was remarkable. We were all looking for heroes or people to look up to. And for me, Malati has always been somebody I've really looked up to. Her service to Srila Prabhupada was unique. All of our services to Srila Prabhupada are unique and wonderful. But hers was remarkable in that she's one of the most spontaneous servants I really have ever seen of Prabhupada. She's one of her abilities is to see an obstacle and to move around it, no matter what it takes to get around the obstacle. She's very clever in finding ways to serve the deities, her spiritual master, and Vaishnavas despite the obstacles, and that's in and of itself a wonderful thing. But in her service to Srila Prabhupada personally, there was a vitality and a spontaneity, determination that was really rare, no matter where the devotee came from. So to be with her and to try to speak something about the glories of Srila Prabhupada, especially in relationship to the pivotal day in history nearly 40 years ago, and that is December 14th, 1969. Because that was the moment that so many desires of previous spiritual masters were fulfilled. It is when everything coalesced together to allow Srila Prabhupada to render a service that he deeply wanted to render to his spiritual master, and that was the founding of Vaishnavism in the United Kingdom through the opening of the first Vaishnava temple. And he sent 6 of his young disciples. He mostly had young disciples at that time. And the 6 of us that came, 3 Grihastha couples, one Grihastha couple had a little girl, one of the first children in Krishna consciousness. So they were really 6 and a half, or let us say almost 7. But believe it or not, even at her age, by the time she came to England in 1968, and then by the time Srila Prabhupada came by the fall of 1969, she was a preacher in her own right. I can remember being at engagements where her attachment for the holy name was so strong that she would dance and throw her arms in the air and people would be completely charmed. So there was almost 7 of us. And we have a short time together. This is a very, very short time to give you a pipeline of Prabhupada's presence. But hopefully we can try to do that by recalling some of just one aspect of Srila Prabhupada's instruction to us. Does everybody know in the Srimad Bhagavatam introduction that it says that the disciple lives with his spiritual master forever by what? Louder, please. By following his instructions. So we have to know the instructions first, and then we get to voluntarily follow those. So I was meditating, there's so many wonderful speakers that can speak on so many things, but it so happened that in my Krishna conscious life that Srila Prabhupada encouraged me in two areas of service. And one was cooking for some bizarre reason. I had no desire to cook before I came to Krishna consciousness, and really wanted as far away from it as possible. It seemed like cleaning up all the time wasn't a very fun thing to do, and half of cooking is cleaning. But it turned out that I found out that Krishna consciousness is sometimes called the kitchen religion, right? So one of the most powerful things we can do to spread Krishna consciousness is actually cook for Krishna. And then I found out actually that cooking for Krishna was really different than cooking for any other reason. So cooking was one, and deity, the study of Archana or deity worship was another. So in my short time I met Prabhupada. I was 25 years old in New York in 1966, and went to my sister's wedding. And it was the first wedding in ISKCON. And the first thing Prabhupada engaged me in was cooking. Said, how many members have come from your family to attend the wedding? And I said, well, Swamiji, I'm the only one. Oh, this is most unusual. So all of you know how big a wedding is, an event in someone's life. He said, never mind. He said, you can help me cook. Now this is the first hour of the first day of my life with Srila Prabhupada. So he engaged me in cooking, and was fascinated from that moment. And then I was only in New York for a short time for this wedding, maybe about 10 days altogether. And then my sister, younger sister Janki, and her betrothed, who's Michael, and he became Mukunda. They had just been initiated very short time before the wedding. The three of us drove across country and went to see our old friends who were in Oregon on a mountain lookout tower, and their names were Sam and Melanie. And they later became Shamsundar and Malati Devi. And all five of us drove down to San Francisco, and between that time when we, Mukunda and Janki lived in Berkeley, and Shamsundar, Malati, and I rented a little tiny place in the Mission District of San Francisco called Lucky Alley. And it was from there that we met the devotees that ultimately started the San Francisco Temple. And I've listened to Shamsundar and Gurdas for as much as I could for the last few days, and they were saying how they would find excuses to go see Swamiji or Srila Prabhupada. And Malati and I were thinking we didn't do that so much. But one thing that was offered to us in that few months that Srila Prabhupada was there was the idea to learn how to cook prasadam and offer it to our altar in San Francisco Temple, which soon had deities on it, but at first it was photographs. And then sanctify that food which was prepared in the most remarkable way, and that was as an act of devotion to God. Now this is foreign for all of us that haven't been in Vaishnava culture, weren't born in a Vaishnava culture. But it was really revolutionary. Even I was talking to Shama earlier and said we were going to talk about cooking, and he kind of chuckled and he said, for a whole hour you're going to do that? But actually it's so important to everyone who aspires to be a Vaishnava. I can say that's true because we found out it was true for Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was expert in so many things. besides being the pure devotee, brilliant, empowered personality that he was, to spread Krishna consciousness, besides being resplendent with all the 26 qualities of a pure devotee, he knew how to do things. He knew how to do practical things. He said he learned cooking from his maternal uncle, his auntie, and street wallas. He watched street wallas. In the Gaudiya Math temples, they are very much known for their cooking expertise. So he wanted for us to learn cooking so we get offered to Krishna and then distribute those remnants to as many people as we could on this planet. His vision for prasadam distribution, let us say, is germane and fundamental to the Krishna consciousness movement. There was never a time from the moment that I met Prabhupada, that was the first day that I met him, before the wedding, he was personally cooking a lunch for his disciples. Now there were only 11 initiated disciples. My sister was one of them. All the rest were boys, and what he called his boys and girls. And Srila Prabhupada said that some of those boys could eat 12 chapatis. So for those lunches that Srila Prabhupada cooked for his disciples in New York to teach them how to cook, that means over 100 chapatis, up to possibly 144. So the energy and time he put into that was astounding. There was never a time that I saw someone come into Prabhupada's presence where he didn't say, "Give him prasadam," right? So even in our San Francisco temple, the first temple, at an evening engagement, if it was a cut apple or a cut orange, it was so important to give prasadam. But Hare Krishna. I see so many faces I recognize. Yes, immediately in the early years of our San Francisco temple, he taught, halwa and samosa and kachori and gulab jamans and puris and luchis and vegetables and dals. We had incredible feasts. So this is the very beginning of our Krishna consciousness movement. So that by the time the end of my period in San Francisco was up, the timeline is 66 fall, the wedding, a few days, 10 days, 2 weeks in New York. Then going back to San Francisco, the temple, Prabhupada arriving on the 14th of January 1967, and then leaving in April to go back to New York. And as you all know, historically, Srila Prabhupada had a stroke where he almost left us. And that wasn't meant to be. He came back to San Francisco to recuperate in Stinson Beach that summer, and then he went to India. He came back from India on 14th, interestingly enough, another 14th December, 1967. And so that was another time with Srila Prabhupada. Then went to Los Angeles in January of 68. And every time Srila Prabhupada came with us, in this one area he revealed more. Different instructions. The way that I would say Srila Prabhupada revealed both a study of deity worship to me and cooking was by giving indication that I was to go learn from someone, especially when we were in India. If we were on Nagar Sankirtan, that's between 70 October and 72, the founding of both the cornerstones of Mayapur and Vrindavan projects. As we were traveling with Srila Prabhupada throughout India in this amazing period, I would say almost every place that I was with Srila Prabhupada, at the end of a prasadam meal, he would call me in and say, "Do you know how to make everything?" And if I said no, he'd say, go learn. So there was some little strong indication that that's where I was to spend some of my time. So, and the same for deity worship, said you go study. So in that way, I had some opportunity from the very beginning years in San Francisco. All the girls did in what I loosely call these days cooking classes, where they really weren't classes, but what Prabhupada allowed us to do is to sit or to come and assist him. So as you all know, until one takes Diksha and wears Kuntimala and wears Tilak, externally, then that's the beginning. And they vow to follow the instructions of the spiritual master. And then after that, when it comes to Brahman initiation, then they're allowed to serve directly the Archa Vigraha, or the deity. So in this San Francisco period, even though we did not get Brahman initiation, the 6 of us, until Montreal, August 68, we still cooked for Krishna, for Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram, and our small Kartamisha deity. So in that period, Srila Prabhupada would have us come into his kitchen, and we would watch him, assist him, and learn how to cook. Also Ranchor taught us some things, and Kirtanananda that spring.
It was another Ranchor.
Different Ranchor, yes, the first Ranchor. So then I was thinking, we were sent here in 68, and as you all know, it took a whole year before Srila Prabhupada came to England. What month did he come in, everyone?
August.
September. Okay. So he came September of 1969, and that was, monumental. You've all heard from the devotees some of that arrival, and so we went to this estate in Ascot, Berkshire, that was then owned by Beadle John Lennon. It's called Tittenhurst, the place, and by and large, the Shamshunder was every day in Bury Place, and so were Mukunda and Guru Dasji, in serving almost every day in London. And Malati had her little baby she took care of, but Janki, Malati, and I were in Srila Prabhupada's service as cooks. So I was thinking, if I could share with you something that you might not know or have ever heard before, but it's so important, and I give the example that suppose Gopal Bhatt Goswami gave his disciples recipes and cooking instructions. How fortunate would all those disciples be? And he almost did that by giving us the principles of how to worship the deity. And for 500 years, the Sevites at Radharaman Temple have been honoring those instructions, not only in spirit, but in procedure. So we are so fortunate that we can pass on to you direct instructions in terms of cooking for the pleasure of the deity, recipes that Prabhupada gave us. So if I look back, starting with this period of our arrival, this is kind of setting the scene, and here's where Malati and I will kind of take an adventure and see how we recollect together about this incredible period of time. It was a short period of time from September. Prabhupada left in the end of December. And as I've been recalling this week, I also am very aware of, and want you to be aware of, the time factor. That sometimes in your spiritual life, time takes on a different dimension. So, a day can be like a lifetime. A moment can be like a lifetime. A week, a month. It depends on how conscious we are of that moment that's happening through self-realization, right? So that's what it was like with Srila. You'll have to forgive me sometimes. I do cry, but I'm not sad. That's what it was like to be with Srila Prabhupada. It was such an immersion. He was so generous in with his presence with his disciples. He gave so freely his mercy. He encouraged with great depth. Before coming here, I read all of Prabhupada's letters again. So I was seeing the long leash that he led his disciples on, the patience he had with our fumbling, bumbling, and inadequacies, and the true love and generosity that he gave in instructing. He was lenient with those that required leniency. He was strict with those that learned through strictness. He was totally individual in his capacity to give. But, even in relationship to, the kitchen, he put me on such a roller coaster ride of instruction. Sometimes he was, again, very lenient with me in regard, and sometimes he would chastise me with the greatest of subtlety that it actually would take me years to understand. So he was unique as an instructing spiritual master for all of us. But going back to this time at John Lennon's, Prabhupada, this was a time before the temple was open, so he was there almost all day. And so from morning till evening, he had very few guests. The men came back in the evening and gave reports, generally. His schedule was wonderful and unique. And I wanted to share a little bit of that first. We had a temple which had previously been a harpsichord recital hall, and that Mangal Arti took place at 4:30. But at 3 o'clock, his servant Purushottam and I used to meet in Prabhupada's room for a Mangal Arti before the temple Arti, and it was allegedly Prabhupada said, "I'm training you up in deity worship." So what that meant was chanting Hare Krishna and doing this small arti, where Prabhupada usually led the arti, and Purushottam would play drum, or I would play drum, or he would play kartals, or I would play kartals, the three of us. And that happened before the Mangal Arti in the temple. And then at 4:30 we had another arti in the temple, and a whole morning program. Prabhupada would give a lecture, then the men would go out. At that point, Srila Prabhupada would take a morning walk. All of you know that he did this every day. And when he came back from his morning walk, he did something that was very wonderful, that he would chant for about an hour. That was remarkable. Those are our first tapes of Prabhupada chanting, and those tapes were sent to the Golden Avatar. And they became our first kirtan tapes of Prabhupada chanting. And he would sometimes do that alone in his room. And he got to know that some of us were close by and called for us, and then we would either play again Mridanga or kartals, and one Prabhupada would chant. And they were the prayers of other Thakur Bhakti Vinod or Narodam Das Thakur. Then breakfast, and reminding a lot of the breakfasts at that time. Then Srila Prabhupada did some correspondence. He took lunch at 1, and Janki and Malati and I also shared that service. The exchanges between Prabhupada and Prasadam were actually very, very special. He didn't teach cooking necessarily, no recipes. He would give an indication of what should be in a dish, and then we would make the dish, and then he would critique the dish or say how it was. And over the years he did that in very different ways. Sometimes he would say too salty, too hot, to this or that, to that. later in Calcutta, he actually had a little signal system with me that this meant third class, and this meant second class, and this meant first class. And so sometimes he wouldn't even say a thing, he'd just go. And I come to get the plate. Also, what was left on the plate sometimes indicated if he liked something or didn't like something. So, let's see. Let's start off with this. I have a recipe for you, and the preamble to that is that Janki, Malati, and I think you heard earlier spoken that in order to grab the beetles' attention, we made some apple dishes for them. So Westerners are generally quite attracted to pastries and cakes and cookies and Western sweets. So we started serving Srila Prabhupada these things. And every time we'd serve them, he'd smile and very nice. So one night, one day, I think it was late afternoon we did that. Late afternoon, he looked up and he said, "This is very nice." He said, and really, you know, like almost plaintive in a pleading mood. "But do you know how to make pera?" So we all went, "No." He said, "Do you have any milk?" "Yes." "Do you have any sugar?" "Yes." "We will go learn to make pera now." So down we went into the kitchen. And this was what Prabhupada said about making pera. And these peras became, the lotus feet of Radha Londonishvara, the first sweet that we sent to Prabhupada in the mail, and he actually wrote a letter about it. So he said, hopefully these will be here. During our stay at Tittenhurst, Malati, Janki, and I cooked for Prabhupada. Who was present for this following exchange, I do not remember, but one day Prabhupada said something like, "These sweets are very nice, but I like pera very much. Krishna also likes pera very much. Can you make pera?" And then he said, and then I'm saying, I can't give you Prabhupada's exact recipe for pera because he didn't use measuring tools. But what we learned was the nutshell principle of making pera. Reduce milk, stir attentively to avoid scorching, till it's a paste-like consistency. Add sugar and cook until firm enough to hold its shape. Cool slightly and shape into patties. Once the buried place temple was opened, we offered their lordships pera daily. It was the first prasad milk sweet that we sent to Prabhupada in the post. I received 2 letters about these peras. He said, "I thank you very much for sending me this Jagannath Prasad pera. This is a very nice sweetmeat. So you learn this art of how to prepare it. I think that you might have purchased this from some Indian shop." This is not so, I say. "But you should try to learn to prepare this yourself. And I have also and make this for the deities. You can offer the deities as many sweetmeats as possible." And I say, what a stark change from then to now. Today, ISKCON, hands down, master of all artfully prepared milk sweets at Bhaktivedanta manner is Srimati Kulangana Devi Dasi Ki. Her peri burfas and desh sops, pantoas, and other sweets are legendary throughout ISKCON. How pleased Prabhupada must be with her expertise, and those who have learned from her how to skillfully prepare and offer the deities as many varieties as sweetmeats as possible. So I have also the pleasure of saying that today we had respected prasad here at this temple, and the servers so kindly brought around trays of very nice things. I didn't taste everything, but had a little corner of, what was that? Not balushai. I'll think of it in a minute. Bengali sweet. Kaju. So it was very nicely prepared, and I'm so happy that this instruction of Prabhupada is already in place. Now, it's up to you to see that this goes on and on and on for each generation, this para business. One day, Prabhupada wasn't feeling so well. So Malati and I were also discussing earlier that when he didn't feel so well, there's generally two kinds of khichdi. One is a dry khichdi with more ghee, and one is a wet khichdi. So usually the babies and the old people, they eat moist khichdi. So that can be as simple as a little adrak, some ginger, and some moongi dal, which is the easiest to digest, and haldi, and a little ghee, or not, depending on and salt and pepper. So if Prabhupada was feeling indisposed, he would often ask for this. But this particular day, he specified in this way. And it was a cauliflower pea khichdi. So I have that recipe in, I believe, Lord Krishna's cuisine, or close to a facsimile of that. Prabhupada requested certain dishes, certain meals, and certain menus at different times. Although he was consistent in general, sometimes he'd want something different. One day at John Lennon's, he asked for lunch with 3 items on the menu: mung dal khichdi, deep-fried potatoes, and yogurt, nothing else. When I asked what kind of khichdi and potatoes he wanted, he replied, make a dry khichdi with rice, split mung dal, cauliflower, peas, ginger, cumin, turmeric, salt, and chili. Sprinkle cut potatoes with turmeric, hing, and salt, and chickpea flour, and fry them. Bus. So that was his full instruction. That's the way he instructed. Just the essentials, with a few details. What I did know at this time was that unless otherwise specified, rice meant basmati, split mung dal meant dal without skins, ginger meant fresh, and more meant heavy on something. So I put generous amounts of these servings on his plate, and when I came to get the plate, it was empty. Now, this was a lot of khichdi on this plate. And Srila Prabhupada, smiling with a soft chuckle, said something like, very tasty khichdi, along with potatoes and yogurt. This is a poor man's feast, fit for a king. I like this very much. So that's another menu to just think about, even though the recipe that I'll give you, for anyone wants a handout of all these afterwards, the temple will supply those for you. And I've made this combination many scores of times. And this recipe that I gave you today is one that's cooked for those of you that have families and don't have a lot of time to cook. It's a pressure cooker khichdi that cooks in 6 minutes. And so you can chop things and have a whole meal on the time it takes you to boil pasta and get a jar from Sainsbury's or something. So it's a really wonderful recipe and just delicious beyond all end. So I'm going to let Malati just speak a little bit about her cooking for Prabhupada, whatever she remembers from Tittenhurst. It's okay.
My memories don't work in little boxes like with labels on them. They come kind of as they come. The Tittenhurst experience for me was typical of most of my particularly early experiences, which was I was multitasking. Husband, child, seva for the devotees, seva for Prabhupada, and trying to survive personally. And my cooking at that time for Srila Prabhupada, when I did cook for him, because mostly I was cooking for devotees, which included somehow or other trying to shop, in the absence. Howdy. There's a seat right up here.
Oh, I can see. Sorry.
So my cooking for Srila Prabhupada during that particular period was specifically at times when perhaps other cooks weren't available for particular reasons. So one of those particular reasons was when we were traveling to London from Tittenhurst for the Conway Hall series. And that was about a 45-minute drive, and we didn't have our own vehicle. There was a hired car with a driver that came along with the vehicle. And I would go in sometimes with Srila Prabhupada and sometimes with the devotees, however we got there. But I would definitely come back with Srila Prabhupada because my service was to make his evening prasadam. And it was never a pre-planned event. It was, I would be in the car before he got in so that he wouldn't have to wait for me to get in the car, my daughter, Srila Prabhupada, and Purushottam, the driver. And he would sometimes turn around and say, Puri's halava, Puri's alu, you know, and it was always understood that milk, hot milk, would be part of the menu. In fact, this morning I had a very blissful morning hearing from Srimati Kalangana Devi about instructions given to her by Srila Prabhupada, specifically regarding milk. And she related a story here in London, how milk was brought to Srila Prabhupada. And the devotees were imagining, he said he wanted hot milk, but they were imagining hot milk is too hot to drink. So they would let it cool down and then bring it to him, or else they would not heat it quite enough. Either way, it was cool when they brought it, warm, but not hot. And Prabhupada rejected that milk and repeated he wanted hot milk. So when they brought that hot milk to him, he also included in the instructions sugar and a teaspoon. So when they brought this to him, he began very happily taking the milk on the teaspoon and sipping it. And milk was steaming, very hot, but in this way, by putting it in the teaspoon, when it reached his lotus mouth, it was the right temperature. So he wanted hot milk and he wanted sugar in the milk. And diverting a little bit, but it was really blissful hearing these stories. How also I had heard somewhere, you know, in the cooking grapevine, that Prabhupada didn't want us to waste milk. He didn't want us to waste any prasadam, actually. And that was really a golden rule in those days, from the very beginning. The prasadam was not wasted. You took what you could eat, and if you couldn't eat it, you ate it anyway. So he explained with the milk, and this was store-bought milk. Now you hear terms like Karmi milk. I mean, I see these terms in even ISKCON forums. Anyway, it was store-bought milk, and he instructed the devotees, after they emptied that milk into the pot, to add a small amount of water and rinse out the bottle like this and add it to the remainder of the milk that was being cooked, so that there would be no waste of the milk. You know, so his word, never waste even a drop of this milk. And I would like to say that Kalangana, whatever she heard from Srila Prabhupada, immediately became a part of her life. So in her cooking, she religiously cooks in such a way, she cooks the milk sweets, but by the time she's done, the pan is completely cleaned. She never burns it because she is so attentive, and that the milk comes together, and by the time the sweet is done, whether it's the sandesh or the pera, it is completely clean. There's nothing sticking on the pan. So, with my cooking, there wasn't so much instructions. Yamuna is a very extraordinary soul, and this was something that, you know, that was, if we didn't get it, Prabhupada got it right away. And very early on, before even any of us really understood what was happening to our lives, we were just attracted to this magnetic personality who was so extraordinary and so real, and, you know, taking our hearts to where they had never been before. But I remember in these early days in San Francisco, how he was definitely giving instructions to Yamuna. And one time he wrote in a letter that she was experiencing bhava. So we didn't even know what bhava was basically at that point, but she was experiencing it. She probably knew. When I say we, I mean the rest of us who were trying to figure out what we were doing. But Yamuna was very attentive and very submissive and always inquiring. The three primary qualities for a disciple to exhibit at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. And because of those qualities, he was reciprocating by giving her many wonderful lessons, which now she is sharing with us, and throughout the years she has graciously imparted to those who also desired to know. So my cooking was, I would not compare it to Yamuna's cooking. I'm not even a cook. I'm just somebody who can grab a pot and a pan and a knife and some spices and have a fire and get something done really fast.
100% not true.
Srila Prabhupada told me that you should be able to cook everything in 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we had the cooker, that did help, but it was a goalpost. It was a milestone that I had to kind of push. You have to get it ready in 45 minutes. And when cooking his lunch prasadam, there was an added factor of timeliness, which was he would take his massage, take his shower, and walk out the door, and you had to have lunch ready. And you didn't really have a clock there that said at 10 past 12 he'll be ready. It's just the door opened, he came out, and you had to be ready. So you became used to working in that type of environment if you were serving Srila Prabhupada. And if you couldn't conform to it, usually you were replaced. Because it was important to him, this timeliness, punctuality. But with me, he wasn't always so precisely giving details because he knew I'm a fool and an idiot and I can't remember anything. 5 minutes after I'm told something, I'm like, what did they just say? Although, it's like I'm one of those people, wow, that was a great class, and then somebody says, what would they say? And I'm like, blank, I don't know. So, but he would tell me certain things, and he would give me a direction to go, and I would go in that direction. And there were certain things that he actually did tell me how to make. One was shukta, and I would remember things like that because they weren't related to anything that I had experienced before. So it was something, kind of radically different. And the ingredients were, in some cases, a little foreign. The karela, the bitter melon, was, a foreign ingredient. So I remember that, and I took great joy in making that for him because he really liked it. And then he would tell me other variations of the same, and he seemed to like whatever variation you would make. There were little things that you would become accustomed to in serving him as a cook. And one of them was that he liked a small amount of chini, of sugar, in his sabjis and his dal. And, very small amount to bring out the flavor.
Right. Totally rounds it out. Did you know that? You did that?
Well, nowadays we have, not only do we have the anti-milk people, but we have the anti-sugar people. So sorry all you people, but he liked sugar. And he was eating what Krishna liked. And Krishna liked sugar, and therefore, Prabhupada used to say, if Krishna liked meat, we would also eat meat. We're not vegetarians. We're Krishnatarians. We are eating Krishna prasadam. So of course we can offer anything to Krishna, but the highest is when you find out what Krishna wants and you offer that. So Prabhupada's diet reflected that, and there were times though when he was not well, he would have an adjusted diet, as she mentioned the 2 types of khichdi, for example. But otherwise his diet was really a wonderful diet of all varieties: wheat, rice, vegetables, sugar, ghee, rices. And Yamuna can tell you this in much more detail than I can. But if you would make him a roti, a chapati, he would tell you which region the atta, the flour, came from. He was so acute. And he would tell you if it had been milled, he would like, if we were in India, he would send me out, or whoever the cook was, to a little place that would grind the seeds fresh on the spot, like wheat, and it would be fresh milled. But he would tell you where the seeds came, where the wheat came from, whether it was northern India or what time of the year. He knew exact winter wheat or whatever. He was so acute in his knowledge and his taste. He was completely refined because he wasn't eating for himself. He was eating for Krishna. So it was very extraordinary in that way. He would, if you made up the plate, this was another wonderful thing, is making up Srila Prabhupada's plate, because there was a certain pattern. So you had a little salt, a little sugar, and a slice of lime, some slices of ginger. And this was just, like fixed price. That was fixed on the plate. That was there. And then you put the sabji dal in the rice, and one hot chapati, and brought it in, and then the rest were like made up on the spot. And you kept an eye going if you finished something to make sure you would bring, if you wanted more of it, at the time. One of the luxuries of serving Prabhupada was to see how somebody would really relish prasadam, and to understand the meaning of prasadam from the lips of the pure devotee who was relishing prasadam. So sometimes in the temple, because we have to cook for so many people, by the time we honor prasadam, it's a little bit cold, and some of the joy of the prasadam, I have to say, is like, it's a little reduced. But Srila Prabhupada insisted on his prasadam being very, hot, like not cool, not, he wanted things hot and fresh.
1 minute late was...
No, you didn't. There was no just now coming. So, it was, you were ready. And there was no discussion about that. I'm sorry, I ran out of kerosene, I didn't have any coal. It didn't happen. Or if it happened, you just made sure that it didn't reflect in the end result. It was quite wonderful, that type of training. Because we were able to actually function under many circumstances. So one little, maybe a couple little cooking stories. Not necessarily at Tittenhurst. But, yeah, one time in Bhaktivedanta Manor, when we were first there, he had a cook-off between myself, Hemavati, and Rebhatinandana Swami. So we had to challenge. We each had to make halava and samosa.
Wow.
And we were all kind of, flumflux, as they say, Just was kind of, it was like exciting that we were going to have this cook-off, but I'm not a very competitive person. And one of those other two was very competitive. So I was actually a little nervous of, I didn't want to win because I didn't want to have to deal with that person. So I was purposely a little slow that day just to hope that mine would be overlooked. But he enjoyed this type of transcendental competition and eating our results, and then, as she would say, critiquing them. So we're having to speak about cooking, but there was something really nice that happened as a result of the Conway Hall series, so maybe I'll just slip it in anyway. The car that we hired to bring Srila Prabhupada came, as I mentioned, with a driver. And it was the same man every I think it was on Wednesday. On whatever the night was we were going, it was the same driver. And he was what you call a typical English bloke. Was nothing, and he had one of those kind of hats on him, and he was very, no expression on his face, good day sir, good day ma'am, just, and unfailingly polite. When Srila Prabhupada would come out, he would open the door and, close the door for him, etc. And bring us into London, and he'd sit at the back of the hall so that when the program was finished, he'd be out to buy the car with the door open, and Prabhupada wouldn't have to wait. But he never ever exhibited any interest in what we were doing, and certainly we were kind of strange people compared to his normal clients, which was from a very wealthy part of, Ashka is generally wealthy people. And we were living at a fancy estate with Mr. Lennon, but we were like, obviously of a different cut. So he just did his job, One night at the program, though, it was just something happened that was really extraordinary. And that was that the audience, which was always a rather mixed audience, there would be hippies, there would be people in suits and ties. If you see pictures of the place, you will see that. Kind of very ordinary-looking people, quite a mixture. And some of them came and even became devotees, Leela Shakti and her sister. And some of them came once or twice, some of them came just once. But this one night, Prabhupada delivered a kind of classic, you are not this body, you are spirit, soul lecture in such a way, kind of like, people were like a little awake. And the first part of the program would be the kirtan, then the lecture, and then again we would chant. So on that second kirtan, the whole audience was responding. Sometimes they would weakly respond, but they immediately began to respond that evening. And there was a certain type of ecstasy that was happening, and Srila Prabhupada suddenly stood up and he had his arms raised and he began dancing. And we saw, and the people in the audience also saw, a very extraordinary occurrence, which was his feet weren't on the stage anymore, but he was still dancing. So maybe you could say he was levitating, he was floating. We always speak how he floated, but he was definitely off the ground. And people seeing this became like, you can say maddened, gladdened, and the devotees were just, you were losing your sense of bodily identity in that situation. Then the kirtan ended. Prabhupada, as would be in certain events when maybe something paranormal happened, he acted just like he did the Jai Om prayers and he just left. He didn't acknowledge that anything extraordinary had just occurred. I was scooted out to get in the car with my daughter and Purushottam. We were in the back seat. Eddie was there. Prabhupada gets in, he shuts the door, and he gets in the other side. He puts the key in the car. You're expecting him to turn it, and he turns and he goes, well, Prabhupadre, kind of got the name wrong. Well, Prabhupadre, you got a little out of control tonight, didn't you? and he nudged him with his elbow. So Purushottam and I, we were just like, choking. And Purushottam went under his breath. He goes, rebirth material. But then this man, Eddie, his name was Eddie, he turned the key and he says, it's just like this car. It's no good without a driver. And I realized that he had fully received Srila Prabhupada's mercy that night. He had heard and understood. And it was really extraordinary because there had never previously been any indication. And the empowerment of Srila Prabhupada to transmit Krishna consciousness to even stone-like personalities was just never so apparent as it was at that moment. It's not about cooking, but it was a really wonderful moment. Then I went home and cooked for him.
I'll jump to two things that have to do with the Lord.Siva. Sri Sri Radha Londonishvara and Jagannath Subhadra Balaram and our beloved Srila Prabhupada and the devotees, which are never separated. Installation day of 69. This is what became our first, what I call signature dish in India. Temples are known for signature dishes. That means dishes when you think, tell me, what is the dish you think of when you think of Radharaman temple? Please, somebody say it. Kheer, more specifically? Vishaka. Kulia. It's called kulia. So this dish is made by cooking down milk to a very thick, almost koa, and at the last minute putting in a reagent like citric acid or lemon, and it cuts it, makes little threads. And then that's poured in a clay cup, and it sits in a clay cup and gets firm. And Kalia is the signature sweet of Radharaman Temple and has been for 500 years. So when we first came to England, we found out, as you all know, kheer, the traditional kheer that Srila Prabhupada taught us to make is made usually with rice. It's the most famous kheer, so that'd be chaval kheer. And then we find out there are many, many, many areas in India that have different varieties of this chaval kheer, called different names in the south or in the east. But when we came to England, we were very excited that we found something called flat rice in Sainsbury. And this isn't poha, flat rice, like from an Indian shop, but it's a waxy rice that has been pressed into flakes and is a little shiny. And all you have to do is put this in the oven with some sugar and ghee and spices and bake it, and you only have to stir it twice, as opposed to the kind of kheer that you must stir constantly to bake down. So this became a real big favorite of ours. We called it baked rice kheer, and we served it with, often with rhubarb slush, kind of a rhubarb compote, and then double cream on Cornish clotted double cream, or whipping cream on top. So when we're reading CC, you'll find a description of a similar kind of transcendental concoction that's served. So the first feast that was served to Sri Sri Radha Londonishvara had this kheer in it. And Srila Prabhupada loved it very, very much. And it became a favorite of the devotees. And as you know, that Radha Londonishvara was installed with only one dress, a saffronish golden yellow dress. And the second dress that we offered was on 3rd February 1970, on Advaita Acharya's appearance day. And I decided to make this sweet. So for those of you who are interested in George Harrison trivia, I can tell you this, that this man was nuts about this dish. And he told me, he said, now, I like a lot, I can't imitate him, but I like a lot of prasadam you offer there at the temple. But if you ever make that dish, you give me a ring. And I'll be there. And so I didn't have a ring-me-up kind of relationship with George, but I did, on this occasion, give him a ring the day before. I said, George, we're going to offer a dress tomorrow, and I'm going to make some of that kheer to offer to Radha Londonishvara. All right, hang up the phone. 2 hours later, a florist van comes to the front of the temple, and he unloads flower vase after flower vase that are wall sconce arrangements, 8 of them, that go on the side of the wall, and a little card on it said, "We'll be there." No signature, right? So the next day, all the devotees, there's so much excitement that we get to offer the deities a new dress, because we were very short-handed. I couldn't begin to say the glories of the devotees that were serving together at that time. The word family has been mentioned, but it's far beyond that. It was a situation where devotional service was so strong, the love for Radha Londonishvara was so strong that relationships became very tight. We were definitely God brothers and God sisters. We were definitely Prabhus. We were definitely lovers of the deity, and the deity was at the center. So when that curtain opened, that blue curtain, and the deities revealed their splendor, I do have a gift for you all also that you will be able to see a little later on, and it's a picture of a close-up picture of Srimati Radharani's face that day that she of the 3rd of February, Gauradas Prabhuta. and it will do what it does to you. But at any rate, when we served out the feast, we served this out, and that personality was there. And you know how devotees get absolutely over the top when they go for eating large quantities of sweets? Well, that happened that day. I mean, everybody became so intoxicated with the nectar of that recipe is here. And the well, actually, you can throw in a few handfuls. Yeah, we did from Covent Garden. Covent Garden used to be a market, and we buzzed down there. And the only other really important thing, I think perhaps the most important recipe that Prabhupada revealed, is especially to Radha, to Jagannath, Subhadra, Balaram, and it is for Rath Yatra. Shyam Sundar Prabhu and Kripa Maya Prabhu and Maharaj Mahavishnu spoke a little bit today about the Rath Yatra. You know, we could talk truly for days on all these subject matters, but I sent Srila Prabhupada an email about Lord Jagannath and the Rath Yatra at a certain point, and this came back. No, maybe it's not here. No. Huh?
You didn't send him an email.
No, did you print this out? This recipe of Bunchi Khichdi? Yeah. Well, let's see if I can try it once again. Maybe you can find it easier than me. Not there, not there. Not there, yeah. Koa, not there. Getting close. Cauliflower Mung Dal Khichdi. Looks like it's not here, Dina. Well, there's two letters about this Khichdi.
There's another set there.
Another set?
Yeah, that's there. That was all that was on the
Yeah.
file.
No, there was another recipe there. At any rate, this dish, Prabhupada sent the recipe for this dish. You call it, it's spelled differently in the folio. Called it should be Bhuni or Bunji Khichdi. It's a thick Khichdi. It's been served for hundreds of years in Jagannath Puri. And what it is essentially a thick Khichdi. You know, we're talking about gila, so this is a thick Khichdi. And it's spiced, who knows what pushpana is? Any of you know what that is? Prabhupada's recipe? So you have to learn these things. We have to pass these things on. He introduced pushpana in 67. We served pushpana in 67.
At my wedding.
So, that's January 25th, 1967. The dish has sweet spices in it. So long dolcini, elaichi, like this, and sugar, and nuts, and chopped paneer, fried paneer, and sweet fruits. And this is a dish that's served to Lord Jagannath, and Prabhupada said that this should be served as the main dish at every Rath Yatra feast. He also wrote a letter early in February of the same year to Krishnadas with slightly different instructions, but it should also be served. So you are truly the first yatra to have a direct instruction from Srila Prabhupada as to the nature of what to serve Lord Jagannath for these Rath Yatra feasts. And I'm sure it's already in place, but again, it's up to you to see that it remains so, because it's very, very special for this yatra, and that recipe is there as well. The truth is, this subject matter could go on. One thing that Malati spoke about, and when I spoke about earlier with time, I will say one thing that cooking afforded a disciple, and that was an intense intimacy with Srila Prabhupada in terms of feeling his presence. So for those that you value, what Sangha means is that you want to feel the presence of a devotee. You want to drink in as deeply as humanly possible the essence of that devotee. So in the case of Srila Prabhupada, when you're cooking for him, you're doing a dance of service around the instruction of the spiritual master. So when it came time, it was to be at 1 o'clock. If it was at 1:04, you were ready at 1:04. Because at 1:30 you were ready at 1:30, but you were so conscious of Srila Prabhupada, trying to please Srila Prabhupada. And this is the essence also of our service to the deity. It's also what means, affords us deep sangha between each other. But cooking, service for cooking, I've spoken to many persons who had the honor or the privilege to try to serve Srila Prabhupada in this capacity, and almost every one of them spoke about this aspect. All of you can try to think how you feel close to your spiritual master, how you feel close to the Archa Vigraha that you worship in the temple, and how you feel close to those that you value Sangha with. How time plays a feature and how consciousness of pleasing them is there. Srila Prabhupada's given us 6 exchanges of love in Nectar of Instruction, and 2 of them are actually around Prasadam. 2 of the 6. And they are what? Offering prasadam to others and receiving prasadam from them. So they're really important. And what makes them potent is the consciousness with which they are conceived of, executed, offered, and then given. And it can be so strong. We see it changes people's lives. Even if they don't know it, they might just say, oh, this tastes good, or this tastes sweet, or something that they like. But it changes their lives, doesn't it? So we have to thank Srila Prabhupada for this incredible gift. And today there was an interviewer that asked some of the things that made ISKCON glorious, or in the last 40 years, some things that we treasure, and what in the next 40 years we should treasure. And one of them is this incredible exchange of the meditation of trying to please Krishna's senses. If we cook for ourselves, we please to a certain degree. Everyone likes something that tastes good. But if we please Krishna's senses, this takes us into another dimension of power and glory and purification. Purification of the heart, purification of the senses, purification of the mind, purification of the emotions, everything that we can evaluate human consciousness with. This act of trying to cook in devotion for the pleasure of the Lord changes everything in our lives. And every devotee that does it is a testimonial to its power, and it's all individual and it's all glorious. So try to, in our busy lives, or whatever our situation is in life, we want to try to aspire for this purity that Prabhupada gave in this one simple little area, and try to save this whole planet. And I think I hear a quiet conch shell, which means we get to turn our attention to the object of our attention. I'd like to first apologize to everyone for any offenses I've made to anyone in the past in this yatra, and pray that we all glorify the deity for now and forever. Hare Krishna.
Prabhu K.
Jai.
Prabhu K.
Jai.
Thank you very much.
Sadam ki jai.
So now we're going to have Arti and Kirtan. But before that, just a couple of announcements. First, please, I would like to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And it hasn't necessarily been an easy trip for Mother Yamuna. She's come so far, and
You're
we really
farther than anyone else.
we really appreciate the effort for her to come. Malati Prabhu will be with us again tomorrow morning, also, sharing some pastimes with us. So please let us thank them both for making this wonderful effort to come and share Krishna consciousness with us, and especially this Bhakti Bhojayate, this prasadam loving exchange, which is so important, by chanting very loudly 3 Hari Bol. So now we'll continue with Kirtan and Arti. Afterwards we'll have a bhajan by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and then we'll continue with some katha. This evening we have Tikshu Prabhu and Parashuram Prabhu who will be speaking a bit about Ratha Yatra. So please, everyone can stick around. Shri Londonishvaras ki, 30th anniversary Mahamotsav ki, Srila Prabhupada